Hey friends, I am back to talk to you about your feet, your donkey's feet, and how to get them, how to know when is it time to pick them up, and what to do to help prepare them for the farrier. We have 5 questions that people have been reaching out to me to ask about picking up donkey's feet. So question number 1 is, what's the best way to do it? Now remember, there's more than one way to do it. My favorite way, especially with a wild, is target training. I like target training because it really helps the donkey get used to being around me, as well as all the questions I'm going to ask them. Now, there are other ways that I have used and I do sometimes use. So with Blackjack and Joker, I did not ask them, I didn't target train with them really very much, even though I did with all the rest of them that I brought home. And the reason is, those two, for whatever reason, they really didn't have a lot of fear. You know, Joker, we had the halter on him on day 2. He was just pretty comfortable with everything. So with those guys, I did do all those steps with making sure they were comfortable with me being around them, but I didn't really target train their feet, and I would just put my hand on the back part of their leg down low, and I would put just a tiny bit of pressure on their tendon there, and then when they would shift their weight, I would release, and that grew to them picking up their feet. With Romeo, I used a rope to get to his feet because he had a crack in him and he needed to be trimmed. So I didn't have time, I had used a lot of time, but Romeo had obstacles with trust more than some of the other ones. So because I wanted to make sure he stayed healthy and I stayed safe, I tied him up to the barn wall, and then I used a rope to teach him to pick up his feet. We were doing it some with target training, and he does target train, but we needed to take another step just to help him get comfortable. So the 3 ways I use are target training, and then just a little bit of pressure and release, or the last way there is using a rope to teach him to pick it up. Remember, when you're doing it, any way you do it, you need to make sure that their mind stays or gets into a good place. They're going to get stressed sometimes when you're asking them these questions. And the most important thing is that their mind is nice and relaxed when you're all done. So if they start to get bothered when you're asking them to pick up their feet, you can go back to something that they're comfortable with and keep working up to the end goal. So the first thing, it doesn't matter if I'm working with a wild or a domestic or a rescue, I always want to make sure that they're comfortable. So first, we're going to make sure that they're comfortable with us standing beside them, and we're going to keep graduating through this until we're picking up their feet. Now, typically, I like to target train to do this. The reason I like to target train is I don't want to get my head kicked off, guys. So by target training, especially with wild donkeys, I'm really helping them get used to being around me, or me being around them. I'm helping build their confidence and comfort with human beings. They need to know that we're not going to eat them. They are a prey animal, so that's something they really are concerned about. I like to target train with that, so doing that, I start off with a long brush so that I'm checking to see, like any kind of responses of uncomfortableness. I do the same thing with a domestic. Now, there's some exceptions to this. Like, I have one that I'm working on training. She's a domestic, and she absolutely loves people. So with her, I didn't do all that target training because she could care less. But I did check in with her before I started picking up her feet. And then with the long brush, once they're comfortable with that, it's to be able to brush their legs and then start asking them to pick up their feet. I do it with target training, and then gradually wiggle and jiggle is what I like to call it. So that's where I'm just having them move their foot just the tiniest amount. It could even start with sliding it. It all depends on their comfort level. And we keep graduating through that until we're picking up their feet. Question number 2 is, how can you tell if a donkey is like physically uncomfortable versus mentally uncomfortable? For that with a wild, I guess it would be kind of hard to tell. But they are, checked out by a vet before you adopt them. If you see any limping, that would be a sign. But with Seamus recently, I went to go clean out his feet, and Seamus is a donkey that I've had for 9 years, and he's good with his feet. And he started to kick, and that was really abnormal. So I used a Scotch hobble on him, and he kicked with all of his might. Because this is so uncharacteristic for him, I had the vet check him out, and then I had a chiropractor check him out. As it turns out, for Seamus, his C1 was out of alignment and his hip was out of alignment. So the foot that he kicked with was when I was asking him to put the weight on the hip side, that hurt. So any change in what is normal for them is definitely a sign that they might be feeling poorly, and you want to have that checked out by your vet. Once we can pick up their feet, then I like to get them in position for just like if they're going to be trimmed. So teaching them to put their foot on the inside of my knee for their front foot, or just resting their foot on my leg for their back foot. Now, something else to consider when we're doing this is you can teach your donkey to kick. So if every time you go to pick up their foot, they start kicking, well, you're not going to start like hitting them or yelling at them. Then you're just saying, yeah, you did have a reason to be nervous. Because if they're kicking, there can be a lot of reasons, of course. But we're not going to beat them up for that. Okay? That's not how I roll, guys. So when you're going to pick up their feet, let's say you're at the stage of petting their leg. If they're really nervous, you're going to know it because they're going to give you signs. And later on, guys, I'm going to do another video just to try to help break down all the different signs for the donkey to tell us how they feel. We have to watch those signs so that we can keep working at building up their confidence. Now, if we retreat before they get elevated, then all we're doing is saying, hey, I see that you're nervous. If we are picking up their foot and they start to kick, what I like to do is to keep my hand there and help guide them back down. And that way the release of pressure is coming once they're calm. Now you can't always do that because maybe they get really, really kicky and you have to retreat. But if we do that too often, then we're going to teach them to kick. We don't want to teach them to kick. So retreat before they respond just by that little slight change. If your donkey is like this and they move like that, that's a little sign already. Question number 3 are, what are some positive reinforcements that I use to help them? So one is I use pay, and the other one is the release of pressure. So with pay, that's like target training or clicker training. I use the word deet to let them know that they answered the question correctly, and then I give them pay. Now, donkeys pay, especially with wilds, I start off using most of the time oats or low starch grain, or a mixture of the two. Now, pay can be petting them or loving on them, giving them butt scratches, but you have to remember that pay or scratches on them, it's not always a reward. Maybe your wild donkey or your domestic donkey doesn't really love to be scratched on and loved on yet. And if that's the case, make sure you're paying attention so that you can give them pay or a reward that they feel is a reward, not just that we think is a reward. If you're using oats or treats and they are normally just really gentle on your hand, and then you can start feeling their teeth on your hand, that's another sign that they're nervous. Another thing to think about is setting them up for success. When you start the activity of teaching them to pick up their feet and progressing through all the steps, did you just do something that they're really stressed out about and they haven't come down? I made this mistake not that long ago. So I was working with Cisco, and he did not want me to pick up his feet. I needed to get them trimmed. We've been working with a long time because he's older, right? His nickname was Joe. So he was 18 years old when we sold him, and he was caught just before we got him. So he was really, really new to being domestic, or learning to be domestic. So I put him in the barn. He was having a tying lesson. And I thought I'd just let him have a tying lesson while we worked on Poncho. And then we went back in there to trim him. But he was really worked up, guys. So I started to try to use the rope method to pick up his feet, because it works so good with Romeo. And the reason we used that rope method on Romeo was every time I would go down to pet him, he kind of would just put his head down, and I thought, boy, you're pretty uncomfortable. I'm not sure if you're thinking about biting me or not, but I'm not going to take that chance. Using that method worked great for Romeo. And so I got Romeo's feet trimmed for Dan and I, and then he got to go out to the 2-acre for a little bit. When I brought him back in to trim his feet the next time, I hadn't worked with him at all. He stood like he's been having his feet trimmed for 13 years. That's how old he was at the time. So have you set them up for success? When I put Cisco in the barn and he had a tying lesson, he wasn't happy with the tying lesson. And then I went straight from the tying lesson to working with his feet. I tried to do what I did with Romeo. It didn't go well, guys. He got pretty upset. He even reared up a little bit. And I decided, you know what? We're going to stop and come back to this the next day. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm not going to tie him up ahead of time. So I just let him be in the barn while we worked with Poncho. And he was still upset. He was pawing. He dug a hole in front of the gate. He was still upset, even though we were right there next to him. So that still didn't go well. So then we thought, all right, the next time we were just out in the pen, and we worked with him out in the pen. And guess what? He was just like, oh, okay, you can do whatever you want now. Because he was comfortable. His mind was at peace when we started. If your donkey's mind is not at peace when you start, you're not setting them up for success. Other things to think about for when your farrier comes for the first time. When your farrier is there trimming your other animals, I would pay my farrier a trimming fee to have him just go pet or love on my animals for a few minutes. It didn't need to be long, but we have the obstacle with a timid donkey or a wild donkey. The obstacle is stranger danger. So helping them get used to a stranger is a big deal. I hope you appreciate these videos. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Share it on social media. This all helps the channel a ton to keep growing and helping more people navigate their obstacles with their donkeys. Question number 4 is, how do I work with a donkey who is maybe had a bad past life or fearful, abused, and they refuse to let you anywhere near their feet? I'm going to do it the same way I work with a wild donkey. I am going to start with, can I stand next to you in the spots that I need to stand? I'm going to start with that with the long brush. That way I can kind of see how they're going to react. And I'm going to progress through everything the same way that I do with a wild donkey. Now remember, I like target training because it's helping that wild donkey learn how to be around me and that I'm not going to hurt them or eat them. And then you could also use just like the pressure and release or the rope. Now if I was using a rope, I've done it with them not being tied and with them being tied. I think I prefer them being tied, but you would have to have taught them to be tied already. And then remember, like if they start fighting you when you're using a rope, you're going to release it as soon as they calm down. Now, they might get their foot away from you. Like let's say they really, really kick. So you're going to let them do their really, really kick thing. And then maybe as soon as they put their foot down, you ask them to take some weight off from it. That could be shifting their weight, and pay them for what you want. You're going to ignore somewhat. You're going to ignore what you don't want and then pay them for what you do want. Remember, again, pay could be food pay. It could be scratches. It could be just standing there with them. Sometimes where people go wrong, we got to make sure that our donkey's mind is in a good spot. And when they're processing what they learned, touching them and petting and loving on them can be too much. So Sometimes leaving them alone, letting them process, lick and chew. And when you think you've let them alone long enough, leave them alone a little bit longer. And then after that, maybe you give them their scratches, but let them process what they're learning. But again, for a simple answer for that, I do it the same way I work with wild donkeys. Question number 5 is, what should you do if a donkey will only pick up 1 foot? If your donkey will only allow you to pick up 1 foot, all that means is it's not comfortable having you pick up the rest of its feet. So again, I'm going to do everything the same. I'm going to work with a long brush until I'm confident that they're comfortable with me touching them with that long brush. And then I'm going to progress to my hand or a regular brush. And then I'm going to progress to me touching their leg or petting their leg for 5 seconds. And then getting them to shift their weight off their foot, and then to pick it up, and then to let me hold it. All of that will just keep being a progression, but breaking it down into baby steps is going to be the most helpful to your donkey, because they really like things to be in a logical order. Remember, the donkeys, they are type A personality. They want everything to have a purpose and a reason, or they're not going to want to do it. So break things down into a logical process for them, and they will be successful. It will take the time that it takes, and we never know how long that will be. I hope you guys find all of this information helpful. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button, share this on your social media. And if you don't know yet, I just released a memberships program, so I can be here to help you throughout your journey on a more intimate basis, more like one-on-one phone calls, or even have some for extra videos. So there's different membership tiers. So make sure you check that out. I'll put a link in the description. Again, thank you guys for watching, and have an amazing day.